So here's the procedure we're going to use for solving most of our nonlinear inequalities. This is what we're going to use for the quadratic inequalities and for the rational inequalities. Then we're also going to do absolute value inequalities, but we will not need this procedure. They'll be a little bit easier than this, okay? The first thing we have to do is we have to set one side of the inequality equal to 0. Some of them are already equal 0. Some of them might say like less than or equal to 10. So then we'd have to subtract 10 from both sides, okay? Then we want to identify what are called critical values. Now for quadratics, those are simply the zeros of the quadratic. It's already set equal to 0, so we just need the solutions like we did in lesson 3, and those solutions are what are called critical values of the quadratic, okay? And since it's a quadratic, there can be up to 2 of them, okay? Then we're going to use the critical values and create something called a sign chart. When I say sign chart, I mean like the positive sign and the negative sign, positives and negatives, okay? And I'm going to show you how to do that in a minute in this video. And then after we have a sign chart, we're going to use the sign chart to identify the solution intervals. Remember, these are inequalities, so our answers are probably going to be intervals of numbers, okay, using the sign chart, okay? So right now, since we already know how to identify the zeros of a quadratic, let me go ahead and show you how to create a sign chart. Okay, so here is a quadratic. Whoops, this should be an inequality. Let's say greater than or equal to 0, okay? So we have x squared minus 3x minus 10 is greater than or equal to 0. This is nonlinear, it's quadratic, and it's an inequality. It has an inequality symbol here. And I said that first we're going to set one side equal to 0, which we did. Then we're going to identify the critical values, which we have. We used the quadratic formula here, and we came up with 5 and negative 2. So these are our critical values. Now we're going to move on to step 3. Let's make a sign chart. To make a sign chart, the first thing you're going to do is you're simply going to draw a horizontal line and put an arrowhead on both ends. On the left side, you're going to put negative infinity, and on the right side, you're going to put positive infinity. This is essentially an x-axis. So it's an x-axis, but there's no y-axis. We only need the x-axis, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to, for every critical value you have, we have 2 of them. For every critical value, you're going to put a little vertical dash through. We're going to put one here, and we're going to put one here. Negative 2 is closer to negative infinity than 5, so we're going to put negative 2 here. 5 is closer to infinity, so we're going to put 5 here. So you're putting them in the correct order on this horizontal line because it's an x-axis. Smaller numbers over here, negative numbers, positive numbers, larger numbers over here. Now that we have the arrow line set up, this is the chart, now we're going to put in the signs. What we want to do is, for each interval, we have an interval from negative infinity to negative 2. We want to put a positive sign or a negative sign right here. We also want to put a positive or negative sign here between negative 2 and 5. And we want to put a positive or negative sign here between 5 and infinity. Okay? The way we're going to decide whether we put a positive or negative sign is we're going to pick a number that's on this interval. Typically, I just pick a number that is smaller than this, one unit smaller than this. So this is negative 2, so I typically go with negative 3. So I'm going to take negative 3 and I'm going to plug it in to the original equation. So I'm going to put a negative 3 in here, so negative 3 squared minus 3 times negative 3 minus 10. And here's what I want to know. I want to know if this is a positive number or a negative number. Well, negative 3 squared, that's 9. So then here we have negative 3 times negative 3, that's another 9, plus 9 and then minus 10. What we wind up with is 18 minus 10, which is equal to 8. That's a positive number. So this number is positive, so we're going to put a plus right here. What that basically means is that any number, if I had picked negative 4, if I had picked negative 5, if I had picked negative 100, if I had picked negative 1,000, any number that's smaller than negative 2 that I plugged in here would have given me a positive number. Okay? Now I'm going to do the same thing here between negative 2 and 5. I typically pick a number that is either 1 unit larger than this or 1 unit smaller than this. Or if 0 is on the interval, and it is, 0 is right about here. If 0 is on the interval, I'll pick 0. But in this case, I'll just pick a number larger than we're 1 unit smaller than 5. I'll pick 4. That's right here. So I'll do 4 squared minus 3 times 4 minus 10. See what that equals. Okay. 4 squared is 16. Negative 3 times 4 is minus 12. Minus 10. This is equal to 16 minus 12 is 4. 4 minus 10 is negative 6. This is a negative number. And so I'm going to put a negative symbol here. And if you had picked 3 or 2 or 1 or 0, you still would have gotten a negative number. So we know all of the output values wind up being negative between negative 2 and 5. Now we're going to do the same thing here between 5 and infinity. I'll typically pick one number larger here, or maybe I'll pick 10, but I'll pick one number larger. 5 plus 1 is 6, so that's right here. I'm going to plug a 6 in. So I get 6 squared minus 3 times 6 minus 10. Okay, 6 squared is 36. Negative 3 times 6 is negative 18, and then minus 10. 36 minus 18, that's 18. 18 minus 10 is 8. And so I get another positive number, so I'll put a plus here. And now my sign chart is done. I just needed to identify the critical numbers, and then on the intervals I have to identify whether it's positive or negative. So this one's positive, this one's negative, this one's positive. And now, here's what we need to understand. Positive means greater than or equal to 0, or just greater than 0. Negative means less than or equal to 0, and positive means greater than or equal to 0, or just greater than 0. And so since the one I'm dealing with is greater than 0, I want this one, and I do not want this one. And so I want the whole interval. It starts at negative infinity, comma, goes up to negative 2. I'm going to put a parenthesis here. And since it says or equal to, I'll put a bracket here. And now I have another interval that starts at 5 and goes up to infinity. So it would be bracket 5, comma, infinity. You've done this before back in lesson 1. And now since we have two intervals, to bind them together, we use the letter U. That's called a union. So I would have negative parenthesis, negative infinity, comma, negative 2, bracket, union, bracket 5, comma, infinity, parenthesis, and that is the answer. So now if you take any number that's less than negative 2 or larger than 5, you can plug it in here for x, and it'll give you a number that is greater than or equal to 0. And that's step 3. That's how we create a sign chart. And step 4, how we interpret the sign chart. Okay?